The air in the trauma bay tasted of antiseptic and fear. Dr. Imani Hayes ignored both. Her focus narrowed to the crushed metal landscape of a man's chest on her table. Blood slicked her gloves, a familiar second skin. She moved with an economy of motion that belied her size, a calm, fluid competence that always seemed to unnerve her colleagues. "Scalpel," she said, her voice even, cutting through the frantic energy of the room. A nurse slapped it into her palm. "Dr. Hayes, are you sure you don't need assistance?" Dr. Park's voice was a silken blade, coated in false concern. He stood by the nurse's station, arms crossed over his impossibly lean frame, a perfect picture of a Gangnam surgeon. He looked like he'd been carved from marble and condescension. "That looks strenuous." Imani didn't look up. She knew what he was seeing. A fat, black woman, an anomaly in this gleaming Seoul hospital where every other doctor was rail-thin and Korean. They saw her body before they ever saw her hands, before they saw the Ivy League degree on her office wall, before they saw the lives she stitched back together with a steady, practiced rhythm. They saw a joke, a diversity hire, a problem. "I'm sure, Dr. Park," she said, her eyes fixed on the delicate work of retracting a rib. "But feel free to chart. I'm sure your fingers could use the exercise." A few of the junior nurses stifled a laugh. Park's face tightened. Before he could retort, the automatic doors hissed open with a violent rush of cold night air. The organized chaos of the ER froze, replaced by a new, colder kind of tension. A phalanx of men in identical black suits flooded the entrance. They moved as one, their faces blank, their presence sucking the very air from the room. They formed a perimeter, a human wall of dark wool and menace. In their center walked a man who was the still point of storm. He wasn't the tallest or the broadest, but the space reconfigured itself around him. His suit was Tom Ford, a shade of charcoal so dark it was almost black, tailored so precisely it looked less like fabric and more like a second, more formidable skin. He moved like the floor owed him deference. Imani's eyes, trained to find the point of injury, the source of the bleeding, landed on his hands. They were immaculate, one resting lightly on the arm of the man beside him, the other loose at his side. No rings, no watch. Just stillness. Absolute, predatory stillness. The man he was supporting was pale, sweating, a dark stain spreading across the silk of his white shirt just below the ribs. It wasn't a gunshot. It was a puncture wound. A knife. "We need a doctor," one of the guards said, his voice flat. Dr. Park stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "I am chief resident." The man in the Tom Ford suit didn't even look at him. His gaze swept the room, analytical and dismissive, before it landed on Imani. It was like being pinned by a high-powered rifle scope. His eyes were dark, a flat, depthless black that seemed to absorb the light. He assessed her in a single, sweeping glance, her blood-splattered scrubs, her steady hands inside the patient's chest, the exhaustion in her posture that was countered by the fierce concentration on her face. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod in her direction. Her. The word was not a request. It was a command, a designation. Before anyone could move, before Dr. Park could sputter another protest, the world dissolved into a nightmare of shattering glass and concussive sound. The entire bank of windows behind the reception desk exploded inward. The air filled with the sharp crack of automatic gunfire. Screams erupted. Nurses dove for cover. Dr. Park yelped and scrambled under a gurney, his bespoke shoes kicking uselessly. Imani's training, her very instinct, took over. It screamed one thing: cover. Her patient was stable enough for a few seconds. She looked at the man in the suit. He hadn't moved. He'd simply shifted his body, shielding his injured man, his eyes already tracking the source of the attack. He was a target, and she was standing right next to him. Without a thought, without a plan, she acted. She surged forward, grabbing the back of his expensive suit jacket and the arm of his bleeding lieutenant. "This way," she yelled, her voice a raw command. She didn't wait for him to comply. She used her weight, her momentum, shoving them toward a small, reinforced supply closet used for hazardous materials. Bullets tore through the wall where they had just been standing, shredding charts and pulverizing a heart monitor. The air smelled of cordite and plaster dust. She bundled them inside the closet, the space barely big enough for 3 people, and slammed the heavy door shut just as another volley of shots hammered against the metal. She fumbled for the lock, her trembling fingers finding the deadbolt and ramming it home. They were plunged into absolute darkness. The closet was tiny, smelling of bleach and rubbing alcohol. She was pressed against him, the fine wool of his suit abrasive against her cheek, his body a wall of unyielding muscle and heat. She could feel the steady, impossibly calm rhythm of his heart against her back. Outside, the battle raged, the disciplined cracks of his men's weapons returning fire against the wild spray of the attackers. She held her breath, every nerve ending alight. She had just assaulted and kidnapped the most dangerous man in Seoul. Her career, her life, was over. A low voice rumbled right beside her ear, the vibration moving through her entire body. It was quiet, devoid of panic, laced with something that sounded like cold appraisal. "You have good instincts, Doctor." The way he said it, the word doctor wasn't a title. It was a label he had just affixed to her. An ownership. In the terrifying, ringing silence that followed, she knew she wasn't in a closet. She was in a cage, and the door had just been locked from the inside. The gunfire outside tapered off, replaced by sharp, guttural commands in Korean, then a heavy silence. Muffled sounds of movement, of glass being swept. A sharp knock on the closet door. "Boss? It's clear." The man behind her didn't move for a long moment. Imani could feel the tension in his shoulders, a coiled spring of lethal energy. Then he shifted, his hand brushing her waist as he reached for the lock. The air crackled at the point of contact. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. The light that flooded in was blinding. The ER was a war zone. Bodies lay on the floor, attackers, judging by their clothes. His men stood like statues amidst the wreckage, guns held low and ready. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Dr. Park was being helped to his feet by a nurse, his face ashen. His eyes met Imani's, wide with terror and a new, venomous resentment. The man in the Tom Ford suit stepped out of the closet. He surveyed the scene, his expression unreadable. He looked at the carnage his presence had brought into this place of healing, and his face showed nothing.
No remorse. No shock.
Only assessment. Then his dark eyes found Imani again. "You will come with me," he stated. It was not a question. "I can't," Imani said, her voice shaking slightly but firm. "I have a patient." He followed her gaze to the man on the table. One of his own men, a stone-faced guard named Choi, was already at the gurney, checking the monitors. "He is stable. My doctors will take care of him now," he gestured, and 2 men in suits, carrying sophisticated medical kits, moved to her patient's side with unnerving efficiency. "I am his doctor," she insisted, a foolish, final stand for the life she knew was already gone. He took a step closer to her. He was not much taller than her, but his presence was immense. The smell of his cologne, a subtle, expensive scent of cedarwood and smoke, filled her senses. "You are his doctor," he corrected her, his voice a soft, chilling whisper. "Now you are my problem. And I do not leave my problems unattended." He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. His men flanked her, their message clear. She was property now. A witness. An asset. A liability. She had saved his life, and in doing so, had forfeited her own. As they escorted her out of the ruined hospital, past the terrified faces of her former colleagues, she felt Dr. Park's glare like a physical blow. It was filled with fear, but also a sick, triumphant satisfaction. The problem doctor was finally gone. She was taken to a penthouse that seemed to float over the city, its windows a panoramic view of the Han River and the glittering sprawl of Seoul. It was beautiful, minimalist, and utterly cold. A cage made of glass and steel. For days, she was a ghost in this silent palace. She was given food, clothes, anything she asked for, except for the one thing she wanted: an answer.
Or the door.
His name, she learned from the silent guards, was Kwon Jinwoo. He was the head of the Golden Dragon Syndicate, an empire built on shadows and blood. She would see him in the mornings, sitting in a large armchair overlooking the city, a cup of tea steaming untouched beside him. He would be on the phone, his voice a low, placid murmur that carried the weight of death sentences. He spoke of territories and debts, of loyalty and betrayal. He was a king ruling from a glass tower, and she was his new, inconvenient courtier. One night, unable to sleep, she wandered the silent apartment. A sound drew her toward his study. A choked gasp. She froze by the door, hidden in the shadows. He was asleep in the leather chair behind his massive desk, his head slumped to one side. The iron control he wore like armor had fallen away, and his face was a mask of anguish. He twisted, his hand clenching in the air. "Minnie," he whispered, the name a raw wound.
I'm sorry.
I was late. Imani retreated, her heart pounding. It was the first crack she had seen in his marble facade. The first sign that a man, and not a monster, lived inside the suit. The next day, the guard named Choi, the one with the stoic face and kind eyes, brought her a meal. She found the courage to ask, "Who is Minnie?" Choi's face shuddered, but he saw something in her expression. He hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. His older sister. She was taken. Years ago, a meeting with a rival clan went wrong. He was supposed to be there. His car was held up in traffic. By the time he arrived, Choi trailed off, his jaw tight. He has never been late for anything since. That was it. The ghost that haunted him. The failure he spent every day trying to outrun with precision and absolute control. The woman he couldn't protect. And now Imani, another woman in his world, was a target because of him. She understood the weight of his gaze on her now, the suffocating protection. He wasn't just keeping a witness quiet. He was trying to prevent history from repeating itself. The rival faction, the White Tigers, were not subtle. They knew a doctor had been with Kwon during the hospital attack. They started hunting for her. A news report flickered on the television in the penthouse. A fire at a clinic in Itaewon, a place where Imani had volunteered once. It was a message. That evening, Kwon Jinwoo entered her room. He placed a small, leather-bound portfolio on the table. Inside was a passport with her picture and a new name, a plane ticket to Zurich, and details of a bank account containing more money than she had ever seen. "This is your way out," he said, his voice flat. "A new life. They will never find you. You will be safe." She looked at the passport, at the face of a stranger. She could take it. She could run. Disappear. Forget the smell of cordite and cedarwood. Forget the haunted look in his eyes when he slept. It was the smart choice. The sane choice. But she also saw the dark circles under his eyes. She saw the way his focus was split between running his empire and managing this loose end, her. The hunt for her was making him vulnerable. They were using her to draw him out, and it was working. Running would save her, but it might kill him. She closed the portfolio and pushed it back across the table.
No.
He stilled. His dark eyes narrowed. "This is not a negotiation, Doctor." "They're looking for a ghost," she said, her voice finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. "A terrified woman in hiding. They're expecting a victim to scurry out from the shadows." She stood up, meeting his gaze directly. "Let's give them a target instead." He stared at her, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He was used to people running from him, not toward the danger he represented. He stepped closer, crowding her against the window. The city lights swam behind him, a dizzying galaxy. He was so close she could see the faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow. "You don't know what you are asking," he breathed, his voice a low warning. "I know that hiding is a slower way to die," she countered. He studied her face, his gaze intense, searching. It felt like he was peeling back layers, looking for the fear he expected to find. Instead, he found only resolve. His eyes traced the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw. For a heart-stopping second, she thought he was going to touch her. His fingers twitched, a barely perceptible movement. "You are not like them," he murmured, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. He meant everyone else. The ones who broke. The ones who ran. The ones who betrayed. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken words, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with the danger outside, and everything to do with the danger right here, in this room. He pulled back, the mask of cold control snapping back into place, but not before she had seen it. A flicker of something that wasn't control at all. It was something far more dangerous. It was wonder. The white tigers escalated. They were a blunt instrument, all fury and no finesse. They leaked to the press that a doctor from the hospital was now associated with Kwon Jinwoo, a collaborator. They couldn't name her, but they didn't have to. The hospital, in a panic, suspended her indefinitely. Then the real message came. A burner phone, left for her by Choi, buzzed with a single picture message. It was Dr. Park. His face was a swollen, bruised mess, one eye closed completely. He was holding a newspaper with today's date. The message was clear. "We know who you are. We can touch anyone you've ever known." He was an arrogant fool, Kwon said, his voice devoid of sympathy as he looked at the picture over her shoulder. "But he was your fool. We can't let them kill him," Imani said, her stomach twisting with a mixture of pity and rage. "It is a trap." "I know." They went. Not to the abandoned warehouse the white tigers specified, but to a location nearby. It was an ambush, just as he'd predicted. A chaotic, violent firefight in the rain-slicked streets of a shipping district. Kwon moved through the violence like a dancer, a symphony of brutal, economic movements. He never wasted a step, never hesitated. But his attention was divided. He was fighting and he was watching her. A ricochet whined past her ear. She dropped behind the cover of their armored car, her heart hammering. A white tiger enforcer broke from cover, rushing her. Before she could scream, Kwon was there. He moved with a speed that seemed impossible, his body a black shield between her and the threat. The exchange was over in seconds. A flash of steel, a wet, choked sound, and then silence. As he straightened up, another shot rang out. He didn't flinch, but she felt a searing heat along her upper arm. She looked down. A shallow red line was carved into her skin, her sleeve torn, blood welling up dark and hot. A graze. Nothing serious. But the look on Kwon's face, it was terrifying. For one split second, the cold, calculating crime lord was gone, replaced by a man looking at the ghost of his sister. His control shattered, and what lay beneath it was a pure, unadulterated rage. He left her with Choi and moved back into the fight, and this time there was no precision. There was only annihilation. Back in the sterile safety of the penthouse, the adrenaline drained away, leaving her shaking. He stood before her, his suit soaked with rain, his knuckles bloody. He was breathing hard, his eyes burning into hers. "This ends now," he said. "Playing defense isn't working," she replied, her own anger rising. Her arm throbbed, a dull, insistent reminder of her mortality. An idea, cold and sharp, began to form in her mind. A violation of every oath she had ever taken. "The leader of the White Tigers," she said, her voice low. "What's his name?" "Lee," Kwon answered, his eyes narrowing. "Why?" "He has Wegener's granulomatosis," she said. She remembered seeing his file once, a VIP patient at the hospital with a rare autoimmune disease. It requires a very specific, very controlled immunosuppressant. Without it, his body would attack itself. He'd be crippled with pain in days. Kwon's stillness was absolute. He understood immediately. "I still have access to the hospital's pharmaceutical network," she continued, the words tasting like poison. "I can flag his next shipment. Replace it with a placebo. It won't kill him, but it will take him and his inner circle off the board long enough for you to dismantle the rest." She had crossed a line. She was a doctor, a healer, and she was proposing to use her knowledge to inflict suffering. It was a monstrous act. She looked at him, expecting to see shock, or maybe even disgust. Instead, she saw recognition. A dark, profound understanding. He was not looking at a civilian anymore. He was looking at a peer. He stepped toward her, his hand coming up to gently cup her jaw. His thumb brushed across her cheek, his touch surprisingly soft. "They whisper about me in the shadows," he said, his voice a raw, intimate confession. "They call me a monster, a ghost. But when I am with you," he trailed off, his dark eyes searching hers. "I remember the sound of my own name, Jinwoo." He had never told her his given name. The confession hung in the air between them, more potent than any declaration of love. It was an admission of a shared darkness, a bond forged in violence and necessity. The plan worked
Too well.
Lee and his lieutenants were incapacitated within 48 hours. But they had one last card to play. The second in command, a man named Kong, was pragmatic and vicious. He bypassed Kwon entirely. He found the one piece of Imani's old life she had thought safely buried. Her older brother, David, a good man with a weakness for bad bets, living in Chicago. A picture arrived on the burner phone. David, tied to a chair in a dusty warehouse, his face a mask of terror. The text was simple. The doctor for her brother. Pier 7. Midnight. "You will not go," Jinwoo said. The words were flat, absolute. "This is my territory. My war." "It's my brother," she shot back, her voice raw. "They'll kill him, Jinwoo. I will get him back." She looked at him, at the cold certainty on his face. He would go in, a storm of violence and retribution.
But Kong was expecting that.
It was a trap for him, with her brother as the bait. She couldn't let that happen. For the first time, she had to move against him. She waited until he was gone, deep in a strategy session with his captains. She found Choi, the guard who had told her about Minnie. "I need your help," she said simply. He looked at her, his face conflicted. His loyalty was to Kwon. But he had seen the way his boss looked at this woman. He had seen her courage. He gave a single, sharp nod. She didn't take a gun. She took a medical bag. She walked onto Pier 7 alone, just as they demanded. The warehouse smelled of salt and decay. Kong was waiting for her, surrounded by his men. David was in the corner, looking small and terrified. "The famous doctor," Kong sneered. "Come to surrender?" "I've come to make a deal," Imani said, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. She opened the medical bag. It was filled not with instruments, but with files. Financial records. Shipping manifests. "Your boss is out of commission. Your organization is bleeding money. Your supply lines are compromised." She laid out her knowledge of their smuggling operations, gleaned from late nights listening to Jinwoo's calls. "You move pharmaceuticals, but you do it like thugs. You're losing half your product to spoilage and custom seizures." Kang's eyes narrowed. "I can fix it," she said. "I can create a legitimate, international medical supply company. A clean front. Your product gets hidden in plain sight, mixed with legitimate aid shipments to developing nations. No one ever looks twice. I can make you more money in 6 months than your boss made in 5 years." It was an audacious, insane bluff. But it was rooted in a truth he couldn't deny. Their operation was failing. As she spoke, she saw the greed warring with the anger in his eyes. She had his attention. She had bought herself time. That was when the warehouse doors exploded inwards. Jinwoo's men flooded the space. The firefight was brutally short. Jinwoo himself moved through the chaos, his eyes locked on her. When it was over, he walked directly to her, ignoring Kang's body, ignoring his own men. He stopped in front of her, his gaze sweeping over her, checking for injuries. He saw her brother being untied, safe. He looked back at her, and the cold mask was gone. There was fury there, yes, but underneath it was a raw, undeniable relief. He reached out, his fingers gently touching the faded scar on her arm from the bullet graze. "The old men in my world talk of legends," he said, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. "Stories of dragons and tigers. They are all wrong." He looked directly into her eyes, and she felt the full, terrifying weight of his claim. "You are the legend, Dr. Imani Hayes." Her old life was ash. Her brother, once freed, took a payout from Jinwoo and disappeared, too terrified to stay in a world that contained such monsters. The hospital officially terminated her contract. She had nothing left. And everything. Weeks later, she stood on the balcony of the penthouse. The city lights of Seoul glittered below. It was no longer a cage. It was a kingdom, viewed from the throne. She heard him approach, the soft sound of his leather shoes on the marble. He came to stand behind her, a solid presence at her back, radiating warmth in the cool night air. He didn't speak for a long time. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with everything they had survived. The board of the hospital sent a formal apology, he said finally, his voice calm. They have offered you the position of chief of surgery. Imani smiled faintly, her eyes on the endless, glittering city. The offer was absurd, a pathetic attempt to reclaim something they had thrown away, a life she no longer wanted. And what did you tell them? She asked. She felt his hand settle on the small of her back. The touch was light, but it was an anchor, a brand. It was possession. It was a promise. I told them, he said, his voice a dark, soft murmur against her ear. Your price was far too high.